Hey everybody, welcome back to the Fearless Artist Podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Lynn, and today I am very happy to have the lucrative artist, Brian Witkowski. Welcome to
Yes.
the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. And we just got chatting a little bit before the episode, and you were already telling me some great gems. So please, just for our audience who doesn't already know you, can you introduce yourself for us?
Yeah, I'm Brian Witkowski. I'm the founder of the Lucrative Artist and the Lucrative Voice. And long story short, I used to teach collegiately in music and I performed professionally in operas and musicals around the US and internationally and did all that stuff. And then moved into the coaching world 8 years ago when I burnt out trying to get an academic job and then burnt out more trying to get a corporate job I didn't want. And then learned everything about entrepreneurship the hard way, to say the least. And so my work has kind of progressed where I've been helping artists and entrepreneurs figure out what's really holding them back. And one thing that's really been a thesis or a question I've been asking is why so many highly talented, highly educated, amazing, capable people are always broke. What the hell is wrong with our
Oh,
society, you know? So how do we solve that riddle and how do we give ourselves the permission structure to actually do what they want and earn a living, do it, and basically make all these internet trolls that tell us we can't charge enough obsolete.
all right. That's the perfect launch pad. You know, that is the heart and soul of the Fearless Artist. We're thriving, not starving artists is our tagline. So tell me, why are these talented, intelligent, capable people broke?
That's it. There's a lot of stuff into it. One fun thing is, like last time I wrote this article, Schubert versus Rossini. So I jokingly asked people, whose retirement plan would you rather have?
I
And
remember that article. It was so good.
and most people, if they say Rossini, it's because they already know Schubert was broke. They definitely, anything's probably better than Schubert, right? But it's really interesting how in the curriculum itself, like just subconsciously, the things we don't even think about, but we just know there's a lot more that gets normalized where we glorify the poverty, but there's not as much stuff where we glorify, healthy amounts of prosperity. So it's something to think about it. And I always tell people in their curriculum, is there a healthy balance? And where might you be normalizing telling the students without even realizing that they're supposed to be broke or making that the implicit assumption in the curriculum. So it's a really interesting thing where, yeah, we can kind of blame academia in a way, because a lot of people back in the day, you could go to college, get your degrees, and you'd get a tenure track job, or you'd have a stable symphony job or something. So most people could have a salary they could count on in the last century. And so it's like you didn't really have to worry about doing it for the money. You could do it without worrying about that because you had some other kind of cushion or some other kind of security or some other source or a spouse or something else. And we're still trying to operate like we're still in the last century, where we had everyone could almost count on eventually getting an employer that paid enough to get a home and raise a family. And now it's a totally different landscape where we have to not be afraid to normalize earning enough to live, literally.
Okay. This is so good. For everyone who doesn't know that article, can you briefly summarize the Schubert versus Rossini article?
Yeah. So in a nutshell, Schubert, he normalized couch surfing, I guess you could say. That's the simplest way the most casual way to explain it. And he didn't really make a whole lot. He didn't know how to charge his worth and so forth. Rossini, on the other hand, he retired at the age of 30. He had royalty contracts and everything in place. So his operas were always produced. So he got to live a decent, rich life and didn't have to compose to his detriment. So, one person, I think he made it to around 70 and Schubert passed away around 31 or something. So, two different lives. So it's just something to think about where else are we maybe doubling down? Like sometimes I joke that I sang Shinna in those song cycles when I was in undergrad and in grad school. And I even did a couple performances later on professionally with the forte piano, and great piece of work, great music that I loved. But I always joke, like, did I sing too much of it? Did I try to be Schubert in my own life when I let things go financially in certain parts of my life? So, something we always just kind of think about is like, where is it being normalized in an unhealthy way without even realizing it?
Yeah. And I love that you're making this idea of relearning it at school as well. I think it's even in just society, it's just prevalent. This starving artist, this romanticized ideal that if you really care about your art, then nothing else matters. And you will give up your comforts, you will give up you'll be hungry. Can you talk a bit more about like what have you seen? Where did this come from? Why do people accept it?
Yeah, I think part of it is like the school system kind of normalized it in that way. And also, I guess you could say, no, some say there's a conspiracy ulterior motive by the powers that be that want to make us actually still get the other corporate jobs and not actually live our lives to our fullest as artists. I don't know how much we want to really believe that, but sometimes you wonder if there's an agenda out there, the way certain things happen and the way we keep cutting arts programs, but encouraging STEM programs when, frankly, right now, like artists and humanists are going to make AI, keep it in its place and keep it in check.
Mm.
we're gonna save humanity from AI, and I like to say AI even knows it deep down. We
Oh, wow.
it needs
Okay,
creative.
just say that one more time.
Well,
Artists are gonna save the world from AI.
it will have to be. Well,
Okay.
our creative abilities and humans creating, like, the source of AI, it needs new creation, new source code, new stuff. Like, people are already complaining about how they don't have enough stuff to learn from. So we have to keep on creating and creating. So it has an incentive to keep us alive and producing art. Let me put it that way.
Got it, got it. That's wonderful. Bernhard Karras is my coach in Vienna, and he often talks about this, that with the rise of AI, the meaning behind what we do as musicians is even greater because we need these real human connections, these real human creations. Okay, so going back to accepting, normalizing this starving artist, what have you seen when you presented this idea of, hey, like, have we normalized this? There is a better way.
Yeah, part of it is, I think, especially now in this day and age, people just need to get over the fear of what certain friends and unsupportive family members might think, or the trolls on the
Hmm.
internet, and just understand the actual cost, and not be afraid to go after what they need to survive or to live, and or even thrive. And part of it also is setting up. There's going to be gigs where you're not going to get the paycheck you actually need to live, whether we like it
Hmm.
or not. But can we at least set up the structure so that we're still getting enough, value exchange? Where if we're not getting the actual cash, are we getting referrals? Are we getting other featuring? Or are we getting other opportunities that can at least, be a launch pad, whether it's for artistic work or something else? Or at the very least, are they making the pressure of the gig not, low enough to make it not worry about the low amount? Like,
Hmm.
there are too many gigs where it's like we get a $200 check, but we're expected to show up and be there like we're getting a $200,000 salary, you know? And it's,
Right.
sometimes we can't be afraid to stand up for ourselves and say, no, at the very least, you got to respect our humanity.
Hmm. Can you talk about your experience with standing up for yourself? Or you mentioned in the past about your finances, letting things go. What was your story in that?
There's a lot of different ones I could go to. There's one is I've done almost 20 years singing in churches professionally around the country in multiple denominations. And one thing that's burned me out is just expecting to be, you know, devout and participate in everything. And not that I'm against that necessarily. I still consider myself a Christian and everything, but the workload and emotionally and psychologically and just, physically and logistically, all just, it doesn't add up to what you otherwise could be doing. And,
Hmm.
the preparatory the other time, and, $50 for one service, but you're preparing, 4 or 5 hours a week sometimes to prepare the music and the rehearsals. And it takes a burden, it adds up after a while. So last year I wrote this article about singing in church, and I just kind of laid it on the table and saying, I'm taking a break from this for right now, and I'm giving everybody else permission to reconsider too. Because if we're not doing it for the right reasons, if we're getting burned out and we feel like we're actually, is our faith being weaponized against us when we can't even get paid enough to live? You know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
we
I'm
can't be
gonna
afraid
have
to
to
eat
find
out
that
like that.
article.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I know that's maybe a conversation for a different time, but the people who serve in church, well, how much of it is serving? How much is it as a musician? Do you deserve to get compensated properly for that? And if you are a Christian going to that service, then it's like it's really muddy with that line.
Yeah. One of my philanthropic dreams down the road, if I become a multimillionaire or a billionaire, is I'm going to pay a church and force them to pay six-figure salaries to their staff singers, and then give the where they have to actually give them enough to live and also serve the community and make it serve its purpose. Because that's another beef that I always had, is that there's hostility even simply doing a recital on a Sunday afternoon when nothing's happening. There's
Mm.
so many opportunities to create revenue and create community and use our artistry for the better. And, we just, they don't do anything.
Why are people averse to that?
I think part of it is, we're still, with all due respect, some of the blue hairs in control are still operating like it's still the middle of the 20th century. And there's an assumption that there's already other stuff going on, and they're used to the ways of how things are. And that some people don't want to lift a finger necessarily. And others, it's the incentive structure sometimes. And other times it's just, some people, they think that's enough, or they think that you don't need extra career support, or that you wouldn't actually, they don't see the value necessarily. So part of our job is to communicate what that value proposition would be, and understand what the economic growth propositions could be in place, and just the community growth and the other development, if we just normalized having more opportunities and creating those with the community.
Mm. I love that. So, with your own career and then with your clients that you're coaching, how do you help them communicate, stand up for themselves, give this value proposition to potential clients who don't understand what it is to be an artist?
Yeah, one is I always tell people, especially my clients who are studio teachers, one thing you can't do in this day and age, or not can't be afraid to do, is to just fundraise like a politician for those scholarship funds. I think one thing that we overlook as studio teachers is that it's kind of set up where most default business models, it's like the student, the teacher, and the owner, or if there's an owner, someone's drawing a short straw, it always seems. And one overlooked thing that the larger institutions have is financial aid and funding sources for that. So we can't be afraid to just also have a good scholarship fund saved up. And then also create a multitude of opportunities at different levels so that all the people that we're worried about not being able to afford it can have an avenue to get in. And then ideally set things up so that that student help them get into a place where they too economically can afford the higher price, because you're helping them get gigs as well. So it could be, a growth mindset all the way down kind of a thing.
Fundraise like a politician. I need you to expand on this.
Just, well, at least here in the US, we have to, all of our politicians, I can't get through a day without seeing junk email that I have to unsubscribe from certain political figures, and I have to like unsubscribe, and I still get the emails. I don't get it. But, it's like, and it's crazy how a lot of, you serve in Congress and you're spending hours a day just fundraising on the phone with donors and finding out what they want. It's a little bit creepy to think about, but we in our own work, we can't be afraid to at least find ways to find people who want to fund what we're offering. Maybe some people could realize, oh, instead of giving 1,000 to this politician, I'll support this local studio down the street, something like that, or other,
Right.
other causes, like we can't be afraid to put ourselves out there, let us know that, hey, we are here. We're offering something, it's of value. And, this can do this for the community and economic growth here. And it's a great way to invest that we don't really put ourselves out there in that kind of framework as much as we should.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know musicians feel very uncomfortable selling themselves. So in your coaching or with yourself, are these strategies that you yourself have tried? What kind of results have you seen?
Yeah, part of it's not being afraid to put yourself out there. And there is that numbers game aspect to it. And yeah, you're going to get the door slammed on you by some people. But on the other hand, when you let people, if you meet people where they are and understand what their assumptions and incentives are and what actually motivates them, if you can realize, oh, they're like, for example, maybe there's a donor that lives nearby and they want to grow their community, they want to improve it economically if it's in a slightly depressed area or something like that. If they want to help, if they have an incentive to help that, then let them know your art is an avenue to help make that happen.
Hmm. So that's like sales 101, finding out what they want and then
Yeah.
telling them how you can solve that problem.
Exactly. And also the other thing is making sure you have the architecture in place with what your business model and offer is in such a way that it sells itself. I think one thing that trips people up with selling is that we're given business models that don't necessarily work for how we sell or the people we're reaching out to. And it's why sometimes the sales feels so icky and manipulative at times, because not everybody wants an MLM or not everybody wants to do this kind of product. Some people need a different experience or need like some people like concerts, other people, maybe they want something in the salon or whatever. So we can't be afraid to think about the multiple menu options and how we can tailor it to the people who would then we be selling to. So can't be afraid to customize more.
When you are teaching your clients, is this something that you work on with your clients and how to create effective business models?
Yeah, that's basically, and figure out what is the right offering, what method of selling. One thing I've noticed is that, so many sales trainings out there, I've been through a lot, and some of them are just like, this is how you, memorize this line. If they say this and say this and that, it's like you become a human chat GPT and
Yeah.
everything's inauthentic. And, it doesn't matter how high you raise your eyebrows, they're still not going to want to buy because they're going to feel the ick before you even say ick. That's something we don't realize nowadays. And I published this article today about how we're in kind of like a post-performance economy where you can't really put on the same show that worked when you were selling to someone through a TV who couldn't change the channel and they had extra income back in the day. Now we're in a world where you have to be ready to be verified and audited on the spot kind of a thing. And you can't just let showmanship, you can't be the way there. It doesn't work in the same kind of way. And so one thing I help clients do is, especially if they're not comfortable selling on stage, if you're an introvert and if you have stage fright, then why try and memorize a sales pitch method that requires you standing in front of crowds and, presenting with the microphone when you should be getting better at writing your emails or creating content that doesn't, drain you emotionally or mentally in that kind of way. So there's so many methods to selling and, what we can actually do to make money beyond what most of the traditional people tell us. So if you are more of a relational type, we can focus on networking opportunities. Or if you're more of an engineering type, focus on something that allows you to just be at the computer and you write emails all day long and perfect your copywriting there. If you don't want to be in a client facing situation, there's so many
Mhm.
there are other avenues that we don't necessarily look at in a lot of traditional business contexts. So helping people figure out what that is and tailor what works for them. And then other people, if they're burnt out in a certain method, what could the opposite approach be? Because like every human
Mhm.
behavior, there's an opposite way we could do it. You can double down and be an introvert on the computer, or you can be someone who's presenting, reaching out directly to people. You can develop the ideas or develop your relationships, or you can work on trusting your intuition more and not be afraid to take risks versus doing putting on the right show. Sometimes you do want to just put on that right show, but there's so many times where you got to evaluate what's the better wrong show or different show how can we dare to be different and be seen better. So it's all about evaluating all those possibilities and creating something that actually works for you versus the formulas that don't always work for most people.
And how do you decide, other than looking at the strengths, which I hear you explaining, like with the person you're working with, the musician, okay, they're extroverted, go to the people. How do you help them overcome this ickiness, or is it in the architecture like you're saying? Can you dig into that?
Yeah, part of it is building that architecture strong enough so that you don't have to feel the ick because what you have sells itself. I think sometimes we're so used to cutting corners, it's like we rely too much on trying to perform our way through getting the sale. And so part of it is making that need to actually perform, let it be natural, as opposed to you're not really sure if the product really works. So you're just going to try and double down on that script kind of a thing. A lot of people, it is that kind of, internal confidence that we have to have, but also back it up with having something that is actually works in the real world instead of having to rely on making, crazy manipulative videos or other messaging or other thing that people don't really want. What can we do that feels less performative, more authentic, that people can really relate to and that people can actually want and not worry about having to worry about, is this a real thing or am I really getting scammed or whatever? Because so many people, especially selling coaching, how it is, the coaching industry, it's it's got a lot of interesting things. And I've lost a few friends with a few of my Substack posts lately because I'm not afraid to call it the fact that some people have, frankly, codependent business models. And, they keep you
Oof,
stuck in there where you're not really allowed to feel like your mindset's fixed sometimes. It's like there's always something new that's wrong with you or whatever. Or so that's
right.
how they kind of present it sometimes. So,
Got it. Yeah, definitely. That's a recurring income. I mean, I was listening to Alex Hormozzi's podcast just yesterday, and they were talking about, what are you guys doing when you take them on the retreat? Oh, we're trying to get them to renew their subscription. And I was like, oh, I just don't like, I understand what you're meaning with that. Um, when it comes to musicians selling, what are we selling? We're selling, let's say, concerts, or let's saying that we have a crowdfunding for an album release. Like what models have you seen that work well to kind of present ourselves with confidence that we have this product?
yeah, first off, programming that people actually want to hear. Sometimes we, get too stuck in our own ways of what we want to do versus what the audience wants. So we have to not be afraid to give them what they want and create a mixture, but also then allow that to be the avenue to introduce our unique artistic creation and give them a chance to get interested in a natural, organic way versus forcing it onto them. That's one thing to think about. And it also, who the people in the community, how can we make it relevant to that community's growth, whether it's at a church or at a nearby school or somewhere else, and realize, we don't talk enough about the economic impact we really can have as artists. I always like to say that a lot of these endowment funds are obsessed with what they get in the stock market, but if they gave the money directly to artists, they get a much more economic return.
Okay, what is the return? Like
Well,
actually economic, yeah.
well, I can't really guarantee exact number, but if you put hands in the artist, they can go out into the community and actually do things that create growth. Whereas
Right.
you're lucky if you'll get the 8% return in the market necessarily. I always like
Mhm.
to say that, but
So
you
when
know,
I don't need the percentage, but when you say growth, are you talking about like the emotional health benefits, mental health benefits?
yeah, everything like,
Mhm.
including the mental health, the community, and also, growing, our civic growth. There's so many ways we can, form a better community, form a better, some say a more perfect union here in the US a lot, where we can, use that as that avenue for fuel so that we can come together for greater purposes.
What are some of the problems that your clients come to you with, and how have you helped them overcome them?
Yeah, part of it is the like sales anxiety. It's kind of like reliving performance anxiety. And part of it's setting up the permission structures that you have in place so that you're not worried, worried about what certain people will think because you're daring to charge what you need to charge or asking for the
Mhm.
right thing. And also giving people permission to say no to gigs that are just misaligned and just do not pay enough or do not offer enough opportunity, and seeing the whole picture as opposed to just, I need the gig on the resume now to get something on the resume now for the sake of it. Like that was one of my problems back in the day, is where I was just too quick to do to every little show that I could get so I could build the resume. Because I was
Mhm.
expecting that if I just had enough gigs on the resume, I'll eventually get the teaching job and I'll be set for life, you know. And a lot of those gigs, $300 check for a 3-month show, it adds up when you don't get paid enough.
So what would you do differently?
I probably would have said no to those gigs, or I would have at least set things up so that, am I am I finding clients by doing this show, or am I finding other opportunities? Like I did, there's one show where I only got paid $1,000 for, it was for a month, but one cast member became a coaching client of mine 5 years later. So part of it,
Okay.
so part of it is, even if I didn't know I was going to be coaching back then, but
Right.
keeping that open mind where you're going to build those relationships and make sure you're not afraid to, connect with people and keep it lasting, because you never know what those relationships could turn into later on. So when in
Mhm.
doubt, don't burn a bridge if you don't have to, as we always say. Although there's some people we always are tempted to.
Right. Yeah, I get that. When it comes to setting fees, can we dig into this a little bit?
Sure.
Because what we've seen with, let's say, Deanna's on a sub list for a few orchestras in the States or Paris, and they just tell you, this is the fee, this is the work. Like there's no room for asking for higher pay or travel fees or whatever. So I can understand, like, okay, sometimes you just say no, but at the same time, if you need the experience or you need to build the network, or can you talk about this when there is no room to negotiate?
I think if you should be able to try and negotiate reciprocity, or at least a decrease in the pressure. As long as they're willing to reciprocate by making it less stressful, make it, give you more logistical flack, or, slack, I guess you could say, or if or make it so that they're offering other opportunities where they can create new networking or new promotions or other gigs later on. One way to get around it, for example, is, can they also agree to do the following season too for a higher fee? So it's kind of like a tryout kind of thing or something like that. So that's one way to think about it. But as far as what the fee you actually need, I always tell people, divide the salary you'd actually need to live by 2,000 hours, because that's roughly the amount of hours you'd work if you had a full-time salary, 40 hours a week. And take that dollar amount, and that should be your hourly rate minimum. So if that makes any sense, like if you need 100,000 to live, divide it by 2,000, that's $50 an hour basically. So
Got it.
how far does that deviate from? And
Right.
then, at the very least, do a risk assessment as far as like how much are you leaving on the table if you did that gig, and how much other income would you have to somehow generate to get still on track to that salary goal. So something to
Mhm.
think about there is at least how much extra work you'd have to do elsewhere, and so give yourself a chance to weigh the pros and cons of, accepting
Yeah.
that gig that's otherwise not enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Risk assessment is great. Um, just thinking though, we get into these situations where we are one of many. So if I say no, the next guy will come in and do it for the lower price without the upsell of bring me back next season for a higher fee. They're like, yeah, whatever, we'll just take the next person on the list. Like any thoughts there?
Part of it is, yeah, you can't be afraid to just let that happen,
Mhm.
and if they want you badly enough, they'll eventually figure out a way. And sometimes you'd have to, there's a long game aspect to it where, yeah, maybe they need to learn their lesson for giving up on you. There's always that aspect, but also, when in doubt, how can we create other gigs so that we don't need this gig that didn't pay enough to begin with?
Mhm.
Position ourselves entrepreneurially to make it so, how can we create a different gig? So who cares if I didn't do that? I'm doing something better, actually.
Talk about what it means to be an entrepreneur as a musician for you.
It's an interesting one, especially in the U.S. Everywhere I've been, there's some people are, when you're trying to reach out for gigs, you get different kinds of reactions. Some people just expect you to have the full-time job singing in the opera chorus or the opera house, or having the symphony chair job, and the idea that you'd have something else, it's like they're shocked that you're daring to, ask for money to put on a production or something, or a small concert or a salon series or something like that. So part of it is just, you almost need to like develop a little bit of a thick skin, just because you're going to get people who are not used to the idea of there being an artistic opportunity they might actually have to pay for. You know,
Mm. Mhm.
especially in the U.S. and maybe it is in Europe and Canada too. There's kind of a third party aspect we don't talk enough about where most people aren't used to actually having to pay full price for things, especially
Okay.
artistic gigs. So many things are subsidized. So it's kind of like you got to be prepared that you might have someone who's having sticker shock 'cause it's like they're getting the doctor bill without the insurance.
Right.
And so that we don't talk enough about that sometimes where, we're operating as if we're forgetting that there's bigger institutional forces out there they're heavily subsidized. So they have, corporate profits and things that back them up. Whereas we're out there on our own. And that's why another thing, like I always go back to like, how can we fundraise and bring more money? Because it's a different kind of ball game that we have to think about. And we can't find ourselves defaulting to, how can I put this? You know, operating as if we can't have that same kind of buffer that the other institutions have. How do we create our own buffering, if you know what I mean?
Okay. Okay. So you're referring to right now, like ticket prices, if
For
you're on your
example, yeah.
own, have to be higher than if there's subsidy. How do you recommend having a buffer or thinking in that mindset for entrepreneurs?
Yeah, part of it is depending what your operation is, seeking out donors and sponsors or other collaborative opportunities with other businesses. There might be another business that's interested in promoting what they have to offer, or other artists promoting their other, visual artwork or whatever, and collaborating with other entrepreneurs. There's so many people who are looking for opportunities that bring people together, and we all can find reasons to promote our products and services together in different kinds of ways. So it could be sponsors in the program, could be other display things. There's a lot of things that we kind of forget about sometimes.
This is interesting. I run a concert series, so I'm just thinking of, with the community aspect that you keep mentioning, growing the community, what can we bring to people? Why do musicians not think in this opportunity mindset, growth mindset?
I think part of it is we're still raised and trained to just expect to get a full-time salary job after school in the symphony. We're kind of there's so few things that we're trained for, like especially as a classical singer. It's when I was in my schooling, it's kind of like, yeah, you go and then you just start auditioning for the Met or whatever else. And it's just like the same auditions and never, you're not really trained to think about other things you could do to create for yourself other than singing for free at a retirement home.
Oh man. Which I hope nobody listening is doing. We don't sing for free or we look for other opportunities there, right?
Yeah.
Networking.
Or at least,
Maybe there's a rich donor sitting at the old folks home
yeah,
who's about
exactly.
to need somewhere to give all their wealth.
So there's that. Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Not be afraid to seek those things out or see if, there was one retirement home in my neighborhood where I grew up that I'd sometimes, when I come back home from school for the holidays, I do a Christmas concert and they always give me a couple $100 as a, token of appreciation. So we can't be afraid to at least seek that out. And then you never know, there might be somebody out there who they don't have anybody. There's a bit of a loneliness epidemic out there. So don't be afraid to relate to people, and you never know what opportunities that could open up. You could find someone who knows someone else, and you never know. Or maybe you'll suddenly get the inheritance. Who knows?
Yeah. Okay. With your clients, what's one limiting belief that you've had someone have at the beginning of a session or multiple sessions that you've seen them overcome and how?
I think the biggest one is being afraid to charge enough and getting over the fear of it feeling politically incorrect to charge enough to actually, have a sustainable studio business. Whether we like it or not, for most people, especially if you have grad degrees, you're probably gonna have to charge at least 100 a lesson as an individual boutique business owner. And rather than think that that makes you evil and greedy, you got to think, okay, I'm a boutique business owner. I'm offering something unique and boutique that the right kinds of people are willing to invest in. And I'm, offering that deeper individual relationship. I'm not offering the standard factory teaching that's happening down the street necessarily for half the price. So we can't be afraid to just embrace our role in the ecosystem and also create multiple opportunities so that even if somebody can't necessarily afford that fee, there's a pathway, or you know, there's something where they can, you can create the right kind of mutual value exchange so that they can afford it in a different kind of way. Or
Interesting. What's a different kind of way?
like part of it, one thing I always suggest, like sometimes we just need something as simple as graduated, tuition, where it might be where they're going to get the gig in a few months, so let them pay later. It could be as simple as that. But
Hmm.
also opportunities where sometimes you might need, like one of my clients actually had a student help with her social media, and
Oh, okay.
like work where, like, for example, I'm at a point in my life where I try to not do too much social media. I just publish on Substack. It's easier. And
Mhm.
I'm still not good at making Instagram reels. I got to work on that, but I know you're great at them.
Oh, thanks. Well, we have a good team behind us. But
Yeah.
to be honest, Instagram is how we found you. So that's why we
That's,
preach so much that even if it's not your platform of choice, you should still have a presence.
yeah,
Because
exactly.
otherwise, yeah, we wouldn't be able to be talking right now.
Yeah. And sometimes I like the joke too. It's like, when I finally feel like making a reel, I'm not in a position to make them. And
Yeah, yeah, right. Actually, one of the reasons that I reached out to you to come on the pod was the article you had about your doctorate, and I'd love for you to touch
oh,
on
yeah,
that
I
because
forgot about that.
many people struggle with that, myself included. I had a few years where I was really agonizing over not getting the doctorate. I've built my career now in Europe, but there was always the fear of what if I go back and there's no room for me. And your tagline was, "Don't do it so that you have a job.
Do it so you don't need the job.
Do it so you don't need the
Don't do
job."
it for the job. Do it to not get the job or not need the job. And it sounds so counterintuitive, but that is what it actually can do for you if you're willing to embrace it in the right way. And one of my biggest failings was I was going through getting my degree, just expecting it to guarantee me a tenure track job somewhere. And it worked for my dad. He finished his doctorate and a few years later got a tenure track job in his own hometown of all places. So that was also,
Oh,
even back then, that was kind of an unheard of miracle for a lot of people, which I didn't
okay.
realize. But I grew up, I was expecting my dad always told me to go just keep getting good grades, you'll get a good job. That was kind of the mantra. It worked for him. He grew up dirt poor on the east side of Detroit, but he worked his way. He went to college. He worked his way up the corporate security ladder that while he was getting his doctorate, and then went and taught and had a really wonderful career. So he's a perfect example of how education can be the vehicle upward economically. But,
Yeah.
now we're in a different world where those exact same jobs we were taught to expect, frankly, it's getting harder and harder to get them.
Mhm.
But if you're willing to invest in your growth and explore those curiosities on that campus, when you're in a safe space where you don't need to worry about working a full-time job or doing other responsibilities, the freedom of being in your 20s stuck on a college campus, has so many benefits we don't think about sometimes.
Apart from the tenure track, what's one positive aspect about the doctorate that you didn't expect?
I think part of it is that end up writing a dissertation with mine, and that gave me a kind of ability to do analysis and thinking and pattern recognition that I otherwise wouldn't have had a chance to really develop. I was writing about ballads by Carl Löwe. Nothing too exciting, but I was writing about how it compared to Wagner's music and the parallels in the composition and stuff. And it was sometimes, some of it was more of a theory paper than a vocal performance paper, but the committee was okay with it apparently. I just had to also talk about performance practices, but I was kind of like, I was curious. Wagner liked Löwe better than Schubert. That always piqued my interest figuring out why. So that's kind of how I found this set of ballads by Löwe that was really interesting, and just kind of studied the analysis and, how, the kinds of declamation that Löwe was an early precursor of that Wagner basically made even more expressive in his own way with his music. But that was a pattern recognition thing that kind of carried over into my work now, where it's like there's similar patterns. What we see in the patterns in music, we see in real life in so many different ways. So when you
Mhm.
dive in and really explore your curiosities as an artist and as a musician, whether you're in the arts or not, there are other aspects in life where it can carry over, and you can use that same perspective and experience and intuitive feeling and sensory, abilities to serve in different kinds of capacities, whether it's in a corporate situation or in another community situation, as an artist or elsewhere. So it does open more doors. We just allow ourselves to think about those possible open doors.
So with pattern recognition in your clients, besides the having a difficult time setting their fees for what they're worth, is there another pattern that you've seen?
I think part of it is a fear of putting yourself out there as an entrepreneur, especially right now. I like to joke that on Facebook, it tells me who my friends are, who my non-friends are that I'm still friends with. Because sometimes it feels like the people you don't want responding to posts are responding more than the friends that you really want responding.
Right.
And so it's like, a lot of people there's a fear of posting too much on certain social media platforms at times. And part of it's just getting over that fear and putting yourself out there anyway. And hey, embrace the block button if you have to.
Is there a limit to too much posting or fundraising like a politician? What's the limit?
That's a good question. I think each to their own. I sometimes say, because some of the algorithms you're told to do it once a day or whatever. And I always tell people, in the end, do what's comfortable for you, and the right people will find you. And at the very least,
Mhm.
like we said about Instagram, just have a little bit of a presence that people can find you on there. And, as long as you're a little bit active, people have a reason to find you. And then you have the bigger thing, like, for example, my Substack pages where I eventually tell people to go to. So I'll share the Substack articles on Facebook and share them on Instagram and elsewhere. And that's the good content that's worth seeing.
Right. And then from there, you bring them to your coaching programs potentially.
Yeah.
Talk about some other client successes that you've seen.
Part of it was, yeah, getting over the fear of charging enough and getting over the fear of being in business and embracing the fact that they're having a six-figure studio and, the successes with that. And, there is, we do have some cultural challenges where it's like people are afraid to make too much, like there's that implicit guilt you have to somehow not necessarily get over, but, understand that, success is okay. The more you earn, the more people you can eventually also help earn, and keeping that
Mm.
perspective in mind as opposed to thinking that you should be guilty for what you earn.
Oh, wow. How do you help someone overcome that money block if they're used to having a certain capped salary, let's say? I'm wondering this also for myself because, yeah, things have changed in the last few years. So how do you help someone overcome that?
And part of it is crafting a plan for like what would be your philanthropic dreams. Not be afraid to have those as in addition to the rest of the goals on your bucket list or your vision board. Because there's so many, like I said, I'd love to force a church to actually pay singers enough to live. you know, that's one of my goals there. For example, like what are some other philanthropic goals that once you finally earn enough, that allows you to do that? So we got to
Mm,
have those big, dreams out there that you can that serve the people as opposed to making you feel like you have to be ashamed of the money. And sometimes, one thing I like to think about is how else can we make sure that every single dollar we are earning is increasing life in some kind of way? You're teaching, you're giving a lesson, what you're doing is going to compound in value for the rest of their life. So we can't be afraid to
wow.
remember that. Like the voice lessons I've taken, yeah, I paid thousands of dollars, but now literally this larynx, I mean, I feel vocally tired at the moment, but it's like it's a multi-million dollar, machine in a way, if I let it. So we can't be afraid to think of it in that kind of way and realize that we're helping other people develop, similar economic, opportunities by growing their talents and their gifts.
Hmm. Yes, I mean, it sounds amazing. Of course, with coaching, we see that with our clients. So every session that we have, hopefully, there's some kind of immediate breakthrough, or it's in a process, and you can see that they're on the track, that they're finding their path if they're scattered or unclear on what's important. Where to start? Where do you give people if they come in and these are great concepts or ideas, but like, what's the first practical step?
What do you mean by practical step?
I mean, where do you start with your strategy?
Part of it is I'll help clients figure out, okay, what can you do that feels like you're in integrity, and what are you, how are you maybe, what are the reasons that make you feel like you're out of integrity? A lot of it is mapping out the incentives and assumptions and figuring out what those are and making sure that we have an incentive structure that's in alignment with the assumptions that we're carrying, as opposed to just making sure we have the right beliefs. I always tell people that we have incentives are basically the conscious face of assumptions, and assumptions are the subconscious face of incentives. That might sound weird, but they're kind of, what are the things that are incentivized us to move that we're consciously thinking about? Are they in congruence with the assumptions that we're operating under? Like for example, somebody, they're incentivized to charge more. They know they need to make more, but they're assuming everybody's going to hate them if they do that. So how do we
Mm,
rectify those things?
mhm.
So part of it's an ongoing process of realizing, hey, where am I letting the wrong assumptions get in the way of the right incentives and vice versa, and creating the right aligned pathward forward with what we're offering.
Wow, getting rid of wrong assumptions. Yeah, I love that. Renewing the mind, taking out lies, and looking for the evidence that what we're doing has an impact.
Yeah,
What's one of the most exciting Substack articles you've written lately? What are you passionate about right
that's
now?
right now. That's it. Might be a little boring, but it's the one thing I actually wrote just recently on the Lucrative Voice Substack. The most recent article is about being under pressure, and is it healthy business? Are you facing healthy business stress that's normal, or are you dealing with coercive urgency with the people in your life? Where are you given the space that you need with a normal deadline that you expect, and the space to to do the work that you want to do, or are you dealing with a boss or a family member or somebody else who's wants the money now, no matter what, and they're not giving you the space to work. So it's an interesting one to check out and kind of think about, because I know a lot of people, especially in the arts, we're dealing with often we don't have the same proven income models that other jobs might have. So we might be dealing with people in our lives who don't believe that we're actually going to make money. So how do we
Right.
rectify that and give ourselves permission to pursue what we want and make sure that the pressure that we're facing is healthy as opposed to coercive?
I'm definitely going to go check out that article. That sounds great. So everybody finding you on Substack is just your name, right?
The lucrativeartist.substack.com or the lucrativevoice.substack.com. So I
The
have,
Lucrative Artist or the Lucrative Voice.
yeah. So long story short, I started my coaching business with the Lucrative Artist because I wanted to help
Mm-hmm.
artists. And last year I kind of had an epiphany where I had other clients who weren't artists. I had a dog trainer. I had somebody who was a lawyer and some others. And the architecture of my work really helps more people beyond the arts. And so I'm kind of at a point where I'm helping a lot of people with the architecture of their businesses. And also one thing I found too is also a lot of people just who are in different stages of their business that I'm helping. And so one thing I've kind of realized too is just I have there's a more macro pathway. Just put it that way. I don't want to get too off track with it. So I want one thing.
That's, yeah.
So one thing also, what I was going to say, here's what I was going to say. With the Lucrative Artist page, I kind of want to give myself permission to write more freely about the arts issues that we face and not have
Okay.
to worry about that saying things that could necessarily go against the other brand, if you know what I mean. So I have a separate, more businessy friendly kind of brand, if you know what I mean. So that's kind of
Yeah.
how I'm approaching the Lucrative Voice Substack page versus the artist. I can talk more openly about how we need to work on these pay issues and so forth. So I can speak more
I'm glad you
openly.
articulated that because I assumed the voice was even more specific to the arts because you're a singer. But I understand that your business model works for beyond the arts.
Yeah. What's really cool though is actually I also have some articles on there where the voice is a business plan in a lot of ways. Like the way the human voice works, there's a mechanism in business that's comparable too. So that's a fun article worth checking out. And I don't know if you ever
Great.
had the Bernoulli effect in your pedagogy classes.
Mm-mm.
That's right, you're a pianist, so you probably wouldn't. But there's a couple of ones where I use some vocal pedagogy applications to kind of make business cases. So some interesting articles on there as well.
Great. Well, everyone can go check that out. And yeah, as you know, we like to finish every episode with an action point. So, Brian, if people had to do one thing after listening to this great episode, what should they do?
Good question. So I forgot to tell you about the book that I wrote,
Oh,
the
yeah, please.
the Modern Science of Getting Rich. I published it 2 months ago in December.
Oh, congratulations.
So
That's massive.
this book, the Science of Getting Rich, written by Wallace Wattles in 1910, and it's one of those books that kind of not many people hear of it, but it's like a cornerstone in a lot of the personal development world. It's like the secret behind the movie The Secret. But one thing
Okay.
and it's basically, it gave me a permission structure as an artist and an academic and others, and someone who thought they had to take a vow of poverty. It kind of gave me permission to think it's okay to earn more. And so that's I always tell my clients to get it. But I published this book, The Modern Science of Getting Rich, because a lot of the coaching industry that uses material from that book, it stays with the mindset and doesn't do much else. And so what I've written was a more operational the mechanics of how you can take that in the modern world and actually make it work versus just
Okay.
being told to think the happy thoughts that you want and the riches will come. And that only works for so long. But my goal with this was to give people some applications to actually use in the modern world. So I'm going to open up to a random passage here. So an action you take today is gratitude. When in doubt, have gratitude. And we always roll our eyes a lot of times when we hear that. So I'm just going to read a little bit from the chapter on gratitude, where gratitude is not about emotion, it's about orientation. Those who are oriented toward gratitude are less easily manipulated because they are not attempting to extract meaning from approval. They are less easily destabilized because they are not fighting reality as it is. They are less tempted by shortcuts because they trust the growth that compounds when they're aligned with the law. In this way, gratitude quietly accelerates lucrativity. It reduces friction within the mind, it conserves energy, it allows attention to remain on the structure rather than grievance. And because it acknowledges that increase has already been occurring, however unevenly, it strengthens confidence without arrogance. So when in doubt, be grateful, and you don't have to And one of the other lines in the original book by Wallace Wattles, because all things have contributed to your advancement, you should include all things in your gratitude. That's a recurring
Mm. Oh, wow.
something I always say whenever life gets difficult, because we can always learn something. We can always find some kind of opportunity to learn and grow from whatever we're going through.
What doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yeah, exactly.
You have the beautiful academic way, and I have the Kelly Clarkson way, but I love that. That is very practical. So, everybody, send us a DM. Tell us what you're grateful for. I'm going to get a copy of your book because that sounds fantastic.
Thank
Where can
you.
we get that? Amazon?
It's on Amazon.
Okay, perfect. Also in Europe, I hope. I will go check that out.
I got to check that. It should be.
Okay, I'll let you know. And yeah, Brian, thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Okay, everybody, go follow Brian on Substack, and we will see you on the next episode. Be fearless. Thank you.